Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice Podcast, episode 297. I am your host and Ohio pharmacist, Kim Newlove. My guest today is Canadian pharmacist Julie Doan. Julie hosts the Collective RX podcast. A link to that podcast is in the show notes on thepharmacistvoice.com. This is the 7th episode in my Pharmacist Podcasters Series. If you are new to this series, welcome. My guests and I talk about podcasting to inspire you to start your own podcast, be a podcast guest, or use your voice in general. If you are interested in podcasting or public speaking, you are going to like this episode. And by the way, if you want to start a podcast, I can help. Check out my free ebook and audiobook. It's on kimnewlove.com. The book is about planning your podcast, and it includes worksheets. To find that book, go to kimnewlove.com, click on the Learn More button under Start a Podcast, and you'll find it there. Or you can also use the direct link in the show notes. Again, the show notes are on thepharmacistvoice.com. Click the podcast tab and then find episode 297. That ebook is only 59 pages long, and the audiobook version is 92 minutes narrated. So that's at 1 times speed. If you want to speed it up to 2 times speed, you can get it done in half the time. You can also buy my self-paced online podcast planning course or sign up for private coaching on kimnewlove.com. That is my online store, by the way. kimnewlove.com is the online store for my business, which is called The Pharmacist Voice. All right, next up, I will tell you a little bit more about my guest, then I'll roll the interview. Julie Doan is a pharmacist, certified life coach, speaker, and the host of the Collective RX podcast. With a passion for empowering healthcare professionals and managers, she provides practical tools and strategies to manage stress, build resilience, and transform the inner critic into a supportive ally. Julie's mission is to help individuals thrive in the demanding field of healthcare, ensuring they can achieve their full potential both professionally and personally. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Julie Doan. Hi, Julie. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. We're going to talk about podcasting, one of my very favorite topics.
I love it.
Yeah, welcome to the Pharmacist Podcasters Series. You're part of this group of pharmacists who has podcasts. Tell me a little bit about your podcast. What's it called and what's the topic?
My podcast is called The Collective RX, and it is a wellness and personal development podcast for healthcare professionals to help them thrive in the really demanding field of healthcare.
And you are not an American pharmacist, so...
No, ma'am.
But do you help American pharmacists?
I basically help any English-speaking pharmacist, although I do have French episodes also on my podcast. But anyone who can understand English or French is welcome to listen and to learn.
Very good. It's not just an audience of pharmacists. Your audience is not just pharmacists, right?
No, it is a pharmacist and healthcare professionals. Although I do admit a lot of the, let's say, guests that I have been inviting have been pharmacists, mainly because it's a large part of my network.
Gotcha. All of the episodes that I've ever listened to of your podcast, The Collective RX, have been solo shows. I'm glad you talked about the interview shows. What do you talk about during your solo shows and your interview shows?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So for my solo episode, it tends to be where I share really my teachings and my thoughts on subjects related to personal development. And it's usually a mix of my own experience, the things I've learned, but also like lessons that I've extracted from my coaching sessions with my clients. So for example, if I see patterns like certain limiting beliefs that keeps on popping up for my clients that perhaps keeps them stuck, I like to share it, but also share what is like how our mindset or our training as pharmacists or healthcare professionals have maybe even contributed further to perhaps this limiting belief that is stopping us in our life. So this is what I usually share in my solo episodes. It tend to be more of an educational aspect to it. And my guest episodes is usually me inviting a healthcare professional that also has either a coaching background or just a background that is unusual and that I feel could really inspire our listeners to think outside of the box and see, okay, how can they create a career that is more aligned with their values, or even design a life that feels more meaningful to them?
Thank you for talking a little bit about both kinds, the solo shows and the interview shows. Have you gone so far as to have panel discussions yet where you have two or more guests?
Not yet. I've been part of these kind of conversations in podcasts or even on LinkedIn Live, but I haven't yet did that on my podcast, which actually is, I haven't even considered that, Kim, yet. So I love that you are expanding my mind.
Yeah, well, I'm not exactly throwing down a challenge, but just a reminder that's out there too. I have only done a few panel discussions where I've had, two or more guests, and they've always turned out great. So don't be shy, just give it a try.
I love it.
It sounds like you have been on both sides of the mic. You've been the guest and you've been the host. Tell me, what came first?
Actually, a podcast guest. That has been my first experience and introduction to podcasting. And it was really through, or most of my episodes were where I was invited, was under my showcasing my services as a health coach. So for those, if we take a little bit of a step back, so yes, now I do a lot more life coaching for healthcare professionals, but I started my coaching career 5 years ago in really specifically health coaching, mainly helping people reduce their need in medication, food, lifestyle habits. And I've also developed an expertise in menstrual health. So this is where I got a lot of interview invitations. And from there, this is where I decided I also wanted to have my own platform where I can invite different people to come, whether it was people who invited me before, or it is people that I'm interested in learning more about, and also that I think could really provide interesting value. So to answer your question, it is first as a guest that I was introduced to podcasts.
Thank you for talking about that because some people think that they have to, start a podcast in order to be interesting enough to get on another podcast. That's not the case. You can put the cart before the horse if you want. Podcasting, there's no rules, right?
Exactly. And even to think of related to that subject is, if you have a message to share, yes, podcasts are great, but even I actually started initially more with like Instagram lives where I came on people's platforms. So anywhere you can just go on somebody else's platform and share your expertise or, certain tips that you have on somebody else's, in somebody else's community or platform. I think it's a great way to start building that podcasting or that a muscle where you get to share your voice.
Great advice. And thank you. It sounds like you kind of made a pivot. As a podcast guest, you talked about one thing, coaching clients, patients, right? But then when you started your podcast, it was more about personal development for healthcare professionals, right? Can you talk about what was the boiling point? What made you want to switch from, oh, I'm just a guest or I'm on everybody else's lives. I want my own thing.
So I would say a few things influenced that decision. While I was doing health coaching, I also all of a sudden had that idea drop into my mind of like, I should also do something for healthcare professionals. So again, I was health coaching, so helping people around lifestyle habit, stress management, etc. And this was like during the pandemic. And I saw how healthcare professionals really needed help with their mental and emotional well-being, and I had all these tools that could be really useful for them. I was just sharing them more with a different community. But I'm like, all these tools that I know can also be applied for them. That being said, I did put that idea on the back burner because I had just started my health coaching practice. I wanted to really focus on something, not have that running after the shiny ideas. And that being said, I knew it was a really good idea, but I trusted in the right timing of that. And I would say about perhaps beginning 2013, so that's like almost 3 years after that initial idea landed in my brain, it just kept on coming back. It's like a nagging feeling or just different signs I was seeing in my day-to-day that I interpreted as it's really now is the time for you to start doing something for your colleagues and doing what you said you were going to do 3 years ago. And I had grown an experience with social media, creating posts and things like that. But as you can imagine, people's attention spans on social media tends to be short. And also within 2,000 characters that, let's say I can post on Instagram or LinkedIn, there's a limited amount of what I can actually share. So that being said, I'm like, I have all these tools I really want to offer people, but the medium that I'm used to sharing on isn't so well adapted. So let me maybe start a podcast, because personally, myself, I love being a guest on podcasts, but I also love listening to podcasts. That is my favorite way to learn new information. So that being said, it's something that I enjoy doing, and that's how a medium I love using as a user. That is where the idea of a podcast came naturally. And there's some people would say, okay, you could have also maybe chosen to do a YouTube channel. But for me, I kind of wanted that more like low hanging fruit for myself. It's easier for me just to put on the mic, start talking versus maybe thinking about the editing, video editing, making sure I always like have my makeup, my hair done, for video. So that's why I started
right there
more
with you. Yep.
That's why I started more with the medium of audio to share my tools and my message.
It sounds like the desire to start your own podcast grew over time. Would that be fair?
Yes, exactly. It was not an overnight transformation. It's something that I grew and I nurtured. And also that through that simmering or marinating process, it allowed me to also develop and mature my ideas, which I think is actually a really good thing. Because let's say if I did launch my podcast in 2020, I wouldn't have had enough experience maybe as a coach to share something that was really, not to say that it wouldn't be impactful, but I say the quality of my ideas have evolved and my thought leadership. So I'm good. I'm happy that I launched it into 2023.
It sounds like you clarified your message over time, right?
Yes, exactly. And really, it's always evolving. And I'm happy I didn't wait until I had the perfect message or the perfect branding before I started. I decided I have something solid enough, and let me adjust as I go.
Your podcast, the Collective RX podcast, started in 2023, right?
Exactly.
Very good. Congratulations on
Thank
starting your
you.
podcast. Sure. And I just want to make sure I heard you right. It sounds like you had kind of thought about it for about 10 years before you actually started it. Did I hear you right?
No, it was since 2020. So it's been 3 years that
3
I've been
years.
really thinking
Okay.
about it. Exactly.
Thank you. So in 3 years' time, you built this coaching practice, not health coaching necessarily, but let's talk about what you do as a life coach. What does that mean?
Life coaching is all about helping the client, one, determine what goals do they have, making sure that the goals are aligned with their core values, which if we take a step back, has actually been helping people determine what is actually important to them. Because I feel some people, you don't necessarily have a clear picture, because sometimes it is part of like social conditioning. And I feel a lot of, I even speak about this in one of the episodes, we grow up with kind of like a checklist of this is what you have to do to have a happy life, go into pharmacy school or med school, etc. And just you can kind of follow the guidelines that society has given you. And I say in one of my episodes, like guidelines are great for clinical practice, but like for creating your own life, you want to create your own rule book, your own, best practices. So as a coach, I help them determine, okay, what is the vision that they are looking to create with their life? And also what tangible steps can we take to create those? And in the process, as they are taking actions, they tend, a growth is never linear. There's always obstacles, it's ups and downs. How can I also support them as a coach to go through those downs, go through the growing pains so that they don't give up on themselves throughout the process? And as we call sometimes the self-sabotaging, in order to get to where they want to go. So that's a really, generalized explanation of what coaching can be. So if we just give more specific examples, for example, like let's say in my health coaching practice, I've helped people improve their diet, how to start having a more meditation practice, start a exercise routine that's actually sustainable, because you tend to have tried something, then stopped after 2 weeks and tried again, stopped. And then there's that whole like mindset part of, oh, I'm not somebody who's consistent, and they beat themselves up. So it's a lot of like giving them actionable steps, but also helping them create a mindset that is supportive, but also that has a lot of self-compassion and patience for themselves. Because I've seen, whether it's healthcare professionals or just professionals in general, I tend to work with high achieving people, and they are very hard and very demanding on themselves, which, does sometimes get in the way of continuing on their path towards what they want to do. And in terms of, let's say, life coaching, certain people have a desire to start a side business, or they have a desire to create a book. For some, they're like, I still love pharmacy, but I'm not really feeling this current practice. I want to see how I can create a practice that speaks more to me. So then it was helping them explore what is a more aligned career looks like. So it can be a lot of different things as a coach, but for me, it always comes back to what is important for them, what is connected, like helping them connect to their values, then helping them create actionable steps that they can take, and then managing their mind that could sometimes get in the way of them, reaching their goals.
Well said. Thank you for talking about that, because life coaching is not something that I've been on the consuming end of, but I do understand personal development. And I understand that in your podcast, you're giving away free samples of your coaching, right?
Exactly, yes. Whether it is me sharing, let's say, a framework with them. So let's say my most recent series that I've launched on my podcast was all about intentional living for healthcare professionals. So I really actually break down the 5 steps that I typically bring clients through, so that they can know, okay, what does coaching look like? But also that if they decide they want to do this journey on their own, at least they have a certain framework that they could use. And, another way to sample what coaching can look like, whether it's with me or another coach, is I tend to share with them like specific limiting beliefs I might see in my clientele, share also how that could look like tangibly in someone's life, then share certain reframes or different perspectives, so that the listener could listen to this, see if there's parts that maybe they identify with, and then at the end, I typically recommend certain exercises or like a question that you can reflect on to see how can you take this episode and really apply it to your own personal circumstances.
You're providing value and you're giving specific exercises, like you just said. I know there's a few episodes that I listened to, and I think it was episode 10. You talked about, I think, 2 kind of assessments. I think you were talking about going back to episode 4, and there was some sort of a exercise or something to go back to. I made myself some notes, but I didn't note the name of the exercise. But I think it's really cool that while you're trying to help people, you're also referring back to old episodes, which makes people want to listen more, I think. So good on you.
Yeah, thank you. So episode 4 was all about actually identifying your core values. And it's always a fundamental piece of life coaching, because if you want to create a vision of where you want to be, it's good to know what are the elements that are motivating you to have certain, certain things in your life. So I always go back to that episode for the core values. And this is like a little bit of my nerdy side. The ability to reference an old episode, yes, it helps people keep on listening, but also I'm thinking about like SEO, when you're like doing those inner links in those websites, that it always like helps me think, okay, yeah, always refer to an old episode, creating those backlinks. So that was just my little nerdy parenthesis.
I thought it was good though, because I hadn't listened to episode 4. I have listened to 4 episodes, but not episode 4. I think I listened to 1, 2, 6, and 10. I remember when we were setting this up, I said, what are some episodes I can listen to that would really help me understand what this podcast is about? And those were the recommended ones. So my listeners that are listening to this, if you want to check out this podcast and kind of learn more about why Julie started it, and I know you're hearing about it today, but what it's about, and get a little flavor for the Collective RX podcast, you can go back and listen to 1, 2, 6, and 10. Julie, any other episodes that you would highly recommend that my audience listen to?
I say those are a good foundation to really understand what is it that I'm creating. And the more recent episodes, those are they tend to elaborate on those beginning episodes. So it's always good to start at the beginning.
All right. And let me just say, if you only have a chance to listen to one episode, I liked episode 6 the best. It was talking about stress and ways to deal with stress. And I don't know about you, Julie, but of course I have stress. And I loved your call to action in that episode where you said, hey, message me on Instagram. And you talked about your Instagram handle. So I know which Julie Doan that I'm talking to here. And I messaged you and I said, hey, I listened to this. And you requested that your audience reach out to you and let you know how they deal with stress. So I told you that I think stress is in my head. And when I write things down, I always think I'm so busy. But if I write everything down and I just read it after I've written it down, and I really feel like it's all there on paper, it never looks to my eyes as bad on paper as it feels in my head. The stress is just completely different when it's on paper versus my head. And, you know, you had talked about some strategies for dealing with stress too and reframing it. I thought it was a great episode. So anybody that has not listened to the Collective RX podcast, episode 6. Julie, anything to add?
No, I just really appreciate that you message me to share, how is it that you deal with stress, and also that idea of the call to action. It is, I guess it comes from listening to a lot of different podcasts. And as I was building my own podcast, so I had never actually taken an official, let's say, course, although I do know there's plenty of courses. And I know you also, offer mentorship around creating your podcast. But when I was first starting, it was more like, let me listen to podcasts that I admire and let's kind of break down in my own mind what is elements that I like and what is it that I feel could be really pertinent, and how can I really make sure that I engage this community and that I'm able to connect with the community. So it's not like a one-sided monologue, but that people actually share with me what they actually took away. Because as a podcast host, as I'm sure you could elaborate on this, is when people message me, it also allows me to know what they found valuable and what they want more of.
That's such a good point that you're talking about, people messaging you, because then you find out who your audience is and what else they might be interested in hearing. How else do you find out who your audience is? It's really helpful to have that call to action and say, reach out on LinkedIn or Instagram, let's connect, or tell me what you liked. Tell me a little bit about your audience. Who else is reaching out to you other than me?
So, I mean, my audience is typically healthcare professionals who are curious about personal development and wellness and really open to trying new things. And one of the key words there is really open, because I do invite guests who maybe have more of an sometimes esoteric background. So, for example, they're both healthcare professionals and they're also perhaps like intuitive tarot readers or energy healers, right? And, my audience is open-minded. They appreciate talks about spirituality, et cetera, even if maybe it's not their necessarily own beliefs, but they're willing to explore and see, okay, how could maybe this benefit me? So that is one thing that I would say about my audience. They're open-minded, they're curious, and they typically have they're on their own also personal journey, whether it's been only a month or maybe it's been several years. And I also do have professionals listening, like non-healthcare professionals, and they typically come from my health coaching community that I've built over the years. And they sometimes message me saying that, oh, I love that episode. Even if, let's say, a lot of the examples I give are around healthcare, let's say, like, somebody, a clinician, their day-to-day, and I kind of break down those examples, the lessons, they are transferable to anybody else who's working in a different field, because I do tend to talk to high achieving people. So whether you're a healthcare professional or not, high achieving people can typically relate to what I share.
Julie, I've got to ask you kind of a tough question. When we build our podcasts, we have an audience in mind. And when we step up to the mic, we think we're talking to those people, right? Can you tell me, based on who reaches out to you on social media or direct message, email, whatnot, Are you reaching the people that you intended to reach?
So I'm not a big analytic person in the sense that I don't look at all my data of like how many, let's say, where because I think you, in one of your episodes with one of your guests, I think it was Dr. H, you looked at where do people come from, what countries, etc. Like I'm not so big on that, which there would be value. But anyways, to come back to your question, I haven't initially tallied, the percentages, but I would say a good part of people who do message me are healthcare professionals. Perhaps it's also because I share a lot more on my platform of LinkedIn, which is mainly my platform that I use to promote my life coaching services and my podcast. So, of course, if that's my community, they would tend to be the more people who message me. But I do, like I mentioned, get occasional messages from people who are more in my health coaching community saying they really enjoyed certain aspects.
Nice. It's nice to get feedback. And I was just kind of curious if you felt like you were attracting the people to your podcast that you feel like you step up to the mic to talk to. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And maybe I could also just add that I've been more intentional recently about being a guest on podcasts where they have a community of healthcare professionals who then discover my podcast and, of course, are more the people who could actually benefit from my episodes. So that's one way for me to ensure, or at least, put higher chances of it reaching the kind of people that I'm looking to reach.
That's fair. I know that you live in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Hopefully I said that in the right order.
Perfect.
Okay. I am, Perrysburg, Ohio, USA. So when we, talk to people, whether we have an audience in mind or not, we also have to be sensitive about what language they speak. So let's talk about the fact that you have English speaking episodes and French. What made you decide to offer both?
I decided to go first with English because that is the language that I'm most proficient in and that I can articulate my ideas best in. I am very fluent in French because I actually did my whole education in French and I also did my pharmacy studies in French. So I can speak very good French, but it's like the personal development and the wellness language. I know it very well in English. So that's why I decided, let's say for my solo episodes, those are the language that I'm going to practice in. And I've also decided to keep it in English because while I do live in Quebec, which is the province, a French-speaking province, I actually practice telepharmacy in another province, Ontario, which is English-speaking. So I do have connections with more Anglophone, English-speaking pharmacists. And for my guest episodes, this is where I reserve them for French episodes if my guest is more French speaking, or if I see there's an opportunity to, let's say, invite a pharmacist who maybe they speak both English and French, but that I do want to build a certain thought leadership in my province in order to gain a certain reputation, let's say, amongst my peers in Quebec. So that's how I kind of decide which language I'm going to record my episode in.
Nobody that I have interviewed for the Pharmacist Podcasters Series has talked about speaking two different languages during their podcast. So you are the first. I thought that was very unique. And I'm so glad that you brought that to this podcast because I want people to feel like they have permission to be a pharmacist podcaster who speaks not just English. It's okay to share a different language on the same podcast. Anything to add to that?
I mean, it is sometimes challenging when I'm thinking about wanting to grow my audience and also my reputation here in Quebec, speaking more French. I'm thinking maybe I should create more French episodes. But then again, the amount of effort it takes for me to write or compose an episode in French versus in English, I would say almost double the amount of like brain power for me. So that's where I decide, I'm going to save it for my guest episodes, but I'm going to find, other ways to build my thought leadership and, just creating my name for myself here. And that's more like actually going to in-person events, etc. So that's why I decided for solo episodes, I'll say that in English and find other ways to build my reputation and creating a name for myself here.
I appreciate you sharing your thoughts around the English versus the French episodes. Yeah, there may be somebody out there who's like, oh, I don't know what I want to do. Maybe I speak a different language. Maybe they speak Spanish or something, and they're trying to figure out, should I do just English or should I throw in my Spanish? I know there's a lot of people that listen to this show in Florida and they speak different kinds of Spanish down there. They've got the Caribbean Spanish because they have influence from Puerto Rico, or they speak the neutral Spanish because they have influence from Mexico. So anyways, I just thought I'd bring that up. You bring something unique to this series in that you have a bilingual podcast. We already talked about who your audience is. What's in it for the audience? After they listen to an episode, what do you want them to do with the information?
So my idea is for them to take one of the actions that I recommend. I typically share, I would say, anywhere between 2 to 4 action steps in my episodes. And I usually end my episodes with sharing, please implement at least one of the tips. Don't overwhelm yourself with 4. Choose the one that resonates the most with you and go ahead and do it. There are some episodes which are more to raise awareness and to invite self-inquiry. But then again, I still do give them suggestions of like questions that they could maybe journal on. So it is an action step at the end of the day. So that is what I really encourage my audience to do, because as you know, we only get the change or transformation by taking action.
I like that you pointed out you want people to take action. And I know you mentioned that you listened to other podcasts before you started your own. And I think that you learned a really good trick, so to speak, or a very good skill from those other podcasters, because I think it's important to give your listeners homework and a reason to come back. Like, I learned this thing from Julie. I went out and I did it. It made my life better. I want to come back to Julie and learn some more. I think that's a great skill.
Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. There doesn't have to be something in it for us as the podcasters, but I think there should be. There doesn't have to be, but I think there should be, because it keeps you going. It's part of your why. Why are you starting this? So, Julie, I've got to ask, what's in it for you to have a podcast?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. And I do agree with you that there should be something in it for us, because it is the fuel or the motivation to keep on going, right? So I have a few reasons why I started and why I continue coming back to the microphone. For one, it does provide me such a beautiful sense of fulfillment, knowing that I'm helping others, and also being able to use my specific gifts and experience. Because let's say in my pharmacy role, which I feel is very rewarding, there are very specific skills I get to bring to the table. But it's not the same skills I get to bring when I'm coaching or even when I'm podcasting. So for me, creating a life that allows me to tap into different skills and to practice them in different circumstances is what, for me, creates a really full life. And podcasting is a part of that equation. It also allows me to express my creativity, use my voice, and take up space, which for me has been my growth edge, which has been something that I've been really intentional in working on. And it also, let's say, thinking for business, it is a platform where I get to build my thought leadership. I get to share my expertise, and it kind of allows, for me, I see podcasts kind of like as a business card. It showcases people, what I do tend to talk about, what are my values. And also it allows me to connect with really interesting people, whether it's because somebody sees, a pharmacist and a podcaster, not saying that's too common, there's already a kind of element of something people can remember me as or want to reach out to me because I have a podcast. Or for me, it also allows me to reach out to other people to invite them on for a conversation. And this is something that I found for myself is people tend to be more willing to accept an invitation to a podcast versus, let's say, messaging be like, hey, can we have a virtual coffee or something? Because I feel like inviting them on podcasts is much more valuable for them because they get to share their expertise. They get to have the light, brought to them and them given the opportunity to express themselves. So I do feel it has been a really beautiful way for me to connect with people that maybe I might have felt perhaps intimidated by initially, being like, oh, I don't know if I can contact this person just for the heck of it. Like, let me invite them on my podcast kind of thing, which I know is maybe there's some limiting beliefs going on my end, but it has been like a tool to extend that invitation.
You're kind of helping people who have limiting beliefs see that even if you have them, you can still make things happen. I hear a lot of good stuff from you, that even though you're a little intimidated by maybe inviting this person that you personally, limiting belief, may feel that you have no business talking to, you go ahead and do the dang thing anyways, and you build that relationship. You get them on your show, you get access to them, you get to have a conversation, and then that's almost like access to follow-ups. Like, hey, it's been a while since you've been on my show. How are you? It's really a great entry point for a friendship or meeting a new colleague. And
Exactly.
I also heard you say it helps you build your brand. Absolutely. And then I love that you actually started with saying it helps you use your non-pharmacy skills, all those things that you have passions for and you enjoy doing, but you don't get to do it when you're in a pharmacy. So I think that's really cool that it complements who you are in a non-pharmacy way.
Exactly.
Awesome. Good for you. As we start to get towards the end of the interview, Julie, I wanted to ask you, where can my audience find your podcast? Is it on a website? Where's the easiest place? Where's the shortcut?
I would say that probably a shortcut would just going on my website. So juliedoanhealth.com/podcast. This is where you'll find the links to both Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And I recently started also, thanks to one of your episodes, a YouTube channel where I just upload for now the audio. I haven't uploaded all the episodes yet, but it's coming, so eventually I will put the YouTube link there. But to come back to your question, it's really just on my website. And there's going to be a tab for podcast.
Very good. I love shortcuts. Thank you. I do listen to you on Apple Podcasts, though. So, once I found it, I was able to listen to it very easily there. I am a subscriber. I follow the podcast, whatever the terminology is.
Amazing.
So whenever I see one come out, I'm rooting for you. But the French ones, I got to be honest, I don't understand them. So I've been skipping those.
That is perfect. You tune into the one, that resonates with you the most.
Thank you very much. Will do. All right. Hey, it's time to give my pharmacist podcasters to be some advice. So can you tell me, what would you recommend to a future pharmacist podcaster? Got any advice?
I do. I actually have 3, so I'll make them short. The first tip is, I would say, really believe in what you have to say. Believe that your voice and what you have to share is valuable. Because we were talking about limiting beliefs, there's going to be that voice in the back being like, who's going to listen? Are you expert enough? Etc. And it's just coming back to, what you have to offer is valuable. And the second tip is allow things to be messy at first. Pharmacists are perfectionists, and this often stops them from taking action. But listen, you are creating a podcast. You are not dispensing medication that could, have consequences on somebody. It's a podcast, so bring in some fun and lightness in it. And as I mentioned before, is like you can have a solid idea, but start and then you just adjust as you go. That is perfect. And the third tip that I have is if you are starting to feel self-conscious or that voice in your head is kind of telling you to who's going to listen to you, blah, 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 is to focus more on the listener and the value that you have to offer them. Focus on the service and how you could really change someone's life, even if it's in small or big ways. It's none of your business how this impacts a person. Just know that you are offering value. You're creating something that is going to be helping someone, and put more of your focus on that versus, what are people going to think of you? And I feel like for me personally, when I am tapped in more in the energy of service versus looking at myself and, woe is me, I'm just so much more fueled to want to show up and share whatever it is I want to share.
Great advice. You should be helping me teach my classes. That last part was awesome. When you talk about focusing on what's in it for the listener, making an impact, I love that point because podcasting's not just to make us, the host, look good. We're trying to help somebody out there. So I love that you brought that point up. Be of service to someone else. Great point, Julie. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, Julie, as we start to wrap this up, last question. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about? Anything that you'd like to promote here in the year 2024? The floor is yours.
Thank you. So, I am creating in-person wellness events for pharmacists, specifically for pharmacists. I'm really creating a community. But of course, that is more for people who are in Quebec. But if we're looking more at people who are around the world, I am creating, or actually I've already created and I'm relaunching another cohort of my virtual resilient program for pharmacists that is coming up in the fall. It's a 4-week course that's going to help pharmacists really build their resilience and master their thoughts to help them thrive in the demanding field of pharmacy. So if ever your listeners are interested in knowing more, I typically will share more on LinkedIn. So you can find me at Julie Doan Health on LinkedIn. And yeah, that is what is coming up for me in 2024.
I wish you all the best with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
To my listeners, go ahead and connect with Julie on LinkedIn. She'll be promoting that later this year, right?
Exactly.
Very good. And if you want to get out of Dodge and go over to Montreal, there you go. Julie just gave you an excuse to fly on over to Montreal.
I would be very happy to welcome you.
Yep. Just as kind of an aside for my listeners here, cool story. I was recently in Montreal in July and Julie connected with me. This is like a God thing or, fate or whatever you want to call it, serendipity. She connected with me within a week of me passing through Montreal. I don't know what inspired her to connect with me, if the LinkedIn algorithm put me in front of her. I don't know. But anyways, it was fate that this episode happened today. She's from Canada. I had just been through Montreal and she's got this bilingual podcast. And now you're on the Pharmacist Podcasters Series, Julie. I'm so happy that you could be with me today. Thank you for being on the Pharmacist Voice podcast. You take care.
Take care.
Thanks again to Julie Doan for being my guest today on the Pharmacist Voice podcast, episode 297. Episode 6 of the Collective RX podcast is still my favorite, but I also listened to episodes 3 and 4 just this week, and I like them too. They're about core values. I downloaded the core values exercise that Julie offered in the show notes, and I am working on that exercise this week. I'm learning things from other podcasters as this series goes on. From Julie, I learned that you can put links to downloads in the show notes for episodes. I have all kinds of links to products and services and things, but to download PDFs, not so much. That's pretty cool. I have a number of lead magnets coming out this fall. There's no reason I can't put links to those lead magnets in the show notes for future episodes. So I will tuck that under my hat and hopefully use that trick this fall. I love this series because we all get the opportunity to learn and grow together. So thank you for joining me to learn and grow together. If you are interested in podcasting, I hope you have found inspiration in this episode. As a review, we talked about the Collective RX podcast with Julie Doan, RPH, today. Julie shared that her podcast is focused on wellness and personal development. It's for healthcare professionals broadly, not just pharmacists. She has solo shows in English and interview shows in French. She started the podcast in 2023, but she was a podcast guest before she became a podcast host. That could be your story too, by the way. Julie's audience gets free samples of her coaching in her solo shows. She introduces frameworks, exercises, and specific examples. She even gives homework, which I like. Have you ever listened to a podcast episode, by the way, and you're not sure what you're supposed to do with that information? I like that Julie's really intentional about her episodes. And again, I find that very helpful. She wants her audience to use the information in their own lives and come back for more. We also talked about what Julie gets out of podcasting. She gets a sense of fulfillment from helping healthcare professionals, and podcasting gives Julie an outlet to use her non-pharmacy skills. You learned that the best place to find the Collective RX podcast is through Julie's website, which is juliedoanhealth.com/podcast. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. Julie's advice for new podcasters or podcasters to be was excellent. I know she made 3 points, but I really like the one about providing value for the audience. As a podcaster, you are creating content that can help someone. When you focus on what's in it for the person listening, you're coming from the right place. Remember that. All right, last comment. If you are interested in engaging with Julie further, check out her website, listen to her podcast, connect with her on LinkedIn, and check out her in-person and online events. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for joining us for part 7 of the Pharmacist Podcasters Series on the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. You can find links to Julie's website, podcast, and social media channels in the show notes for episode 297 on thepharmacistvoice.com. In the show notes, you'll find a link to the other 6 episodes of the Pharmacist Podcasters series, my social media links, a link to my free ebook and audiobook, my podcasting course, my private coaching link, and more. Lots and lots of links today, as always. Everything you need is on thepharmacistvoice.com. If you know someone who might like to learn about the Collective RX podcast or is interested in starting a podcast, please share this episode with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist's Voice podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Thanks for listening today. I'll talk to you next week.